Imagine a bustling, muddy gold mining town right in the heart of Central Africa.
Right.
We're talking about the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And it's this place that is just defined by intense physical labor, constant nomadic movement, and these overlapping, deeply entrenched armed conflicts.
Yeah, it's an incredibly volatile environment.
Exactly. So now picture that silently moving through this chaotic, densely packed region is a highly fatal, incredibly rare strain of a terrifying virus.
And we are talking about an Ebola outbreak here.
We are, but it's not the strain the world spent the last decade building an arsenal against.
No, not at all.
This is a variant for which absolutely no approved vaccine exists. And as we speak, it is spreading rapidly out of these rural mining camps, slipping invisibly across international borders, and spilling right over into the densely populated, bustling capital of Uganda.
Yeah, Kampala. It's really bad.
It's basically biological fire racing toward a powder keg. And the clock is ticking way faster than the global health apparatus anticipated.
Well, the ground reality is outpacing the international response by a mile. I mean, we are watching a microscopic pathogen just ruthlessly exploit the macroscopic fractures of human geopolitics, conflict, and sheer geographical vulnerability.
Yeah. But hey, before we go any further, I want to briefly ask you, the listener, to please like, subscribe, and follow the show. Your support directly fuels our ability to bring you these extensive deep dives.
It really does help a lot.
It does. Also, I have a very quick update for you regarding the Martin Stevens versus OpenAI matter. I want to convey these exact details to clear up all the noise out there.
All right, there's been a lot of confusion.
So much confusion. So this is not a lawsuit. There is currently a voluntary quiet period, no settlement discussions are confirmed, and the dead man's switch is inactive, meaning Martin is safe.
Good to know.
Yeah, just wanted to get that out there. All right, back to the mission for this deep dive. Our goal today isn't just to read you the headlines about Central Africa.
We're going way deeper than that.
Exactly. We are unpacking an incredibly dense stack of research here. We've got real-time World Health Organization, rapid risk assessments, CDC dispatches, news reports from NewsNation and Newsweek, a Snopes fact check, and honestly, a highly technical academic paper on the mathematical modeling of epidemics.
That math paper is something else. It really is.
It blew my mind. But we want to understand the terrifying biological reality on the ground, right? And how the gears of global geopolitics violently grind against each other in response to it.
And how scientists are trying to use advanced theoretical math to predict the future of this outbreak against the backdrop of global summer travel.
Because it's summer 2026 and people are moving.
Yeah, the through line connecting all of this is really just the sheer velocity of modern global systems. I mean, a failure in a local diagnostic test in a rural clinic inevitably triggers a chain reaction.
Oh, absolutely.
And that reaction forces mathematicians half a world away to rewrite their predictive algorithms, and it forces governments to shut down international airspace.
It's all connected. So let's start right at ground zero. We really have to establish the human timeline first.
Yeah, we need to look at where this began.
Right. So the origins of this specific outbreak point to the Mongwalu Health Zone. This is located in the Ituri province in the northeastern DRC.
It's a very specific type of environment, too.
Yeah, it's a rural area, but heavily industrialized in terms of informal artisanal gold mining.
And the geography and the local economy, well, those are the most crucial variables here. You know, Ituri isn't an isolated, static village.
Right.
It is a hypermobile economic hub. Artisanal gold mining relies on transient labor. Miners move rapidly from camp to camp depending on the yields.
So they're constantly packing up and shifting locations.
Exactly. Which means you have thousands of people circulating in close quarters, sharing resources, and then dispersing across a highly porous region. And that region borders both South Sudan and Uganda.
Which is a logistical nightmare for containment. And the human cost became visible on April 24, 2026.
That was the first recognized case.
Right. According to the epidemiological data, a nurse working at a local hospital in the Bunia Health Zone died. We don't have her demographic details, unfortunately, but we do know she developed hemorrhagic symptoms.
And that was the red flag.
A huge one. Her illness alone led to the direct infection of 8 other attending healthcare workers at that exact same facility.
Yeah, and see, when a virus effectively neutralizes the very people tasked with containing it, the outbreak immediately jumps in severity.
It's like the fireman catching fire.
Exactly like that. Healthcare-associated infections suggest two things. First, the pathogen is highly transmissible through direct contact with bodily fluids, which is characteristic of fellow viruses like Ebola.
Right.
And second, the fundamental infrastructure for infection prevention and control, or IPC, has catastrophic vulnerabilities. I mean, a hospital without adequate personal protective equipment, isolation wards, or just basic sanitation protocols.
It stops being a hospital, basically.
Exactly. It ceases to be a place of healing and becomes a centralized amplification hub for the virus.
Because of that initial cluster of medical staff, the provincial health teams realized they were already way behind.
They had to play catch up immediately.
Yeah, so they had to launch a retrospective investigation. They were essentially working backward through the hospital logs and the community death records to see what they missed.
And the numbers they found were just
Staggering. Between mid-April and mid-May, they identified 246 suspected cases and 65 deaths.
Yeah.
That is a 26.4% case fatality rate right at the onset. And, hiding inside that broader data is just a horrific detail.
A family cluster.
Yes. A single-family cluster experienced 15 deaths in a 2-week window.
A family cluster experiencing 15 fatalities in 14 days speaks to the biological ferocity of the pathogen. It's incredibly aggressive.
It really is.
And to understand why it kills so quickly, we have to look at the specific virology. The retrospective sequencing confirmed this is the Bundibugyo Ebola virus, or BDBV.
And I want to break down why Bundibugyo is different for you listening. The sources show it as a historical fatality rate of 30% to 50%.
Right.
Which, ironically, is actually lower than the Zaire strain. Zaire can hit, 70 to 90%?
Yeah, Zaire is historically the most lethal.
But the danger here isn't just the raw fatality percentage, is it? It's the biological mechanics of how it attacks the human body.
Oh, absolutely. The mechanism of a filovirus infection is what makes it so devastating. Bundibugyo, much like Zaire, essentially hijacks the immune system's first responders.
And white blood cells.
Specifically the macrophages and dendritic cells. The virus replicates inside them, causing these cells to release a massive chaotic wave of inflammatory proteins.
Oh.
This triggers what we call a cytokine storm. The immune system basically carpet bombs its own host.
It's an overreaction that destroys the body.
Exactly. And this profound inflammation breaks down the endothelial cells, which, are the cells lining the blood vessels.
The blood vessels literally lose their structural integrity. They just become permeable.
They begin to leak, and that is the hemorrhagic manifestation. The patient suffers systemic fluid loss, plunging blood pressure, and multi-organ failure.
It's brutal.
It is, and because this happens so violently, the viral load in the patient's blood, sweat, and bodily fluids is astronomically high.
So anyone touching them is in danger.
Right. Anyone touching the patient or even their contaminated bedding without full hazmat protection is exposed to millions of viral particles.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most alarming revelation in the WHO Rapid Risk Assessment.
The timeline.
Yes, the timeline. This highly fatal, highly transmissible virus circulated in this mining region, killing entire families for 6 full weeks, completely undetected by the global health community.
Undetected.
How does a virus this lethal operate in the shadows for a month and a half?
Well, it exploited a massive vulnerability in our diagnostic infrastructure. I mean, the global health community deployed rapid diagnostic tests to the DRC following the massive West African and subsequent regional outbreaks.
Right, so the tests were physically there.
They were there. But those rapid tests operate like highly specific molecular locks. They use antibodies designed to bind exclusively to the specific surface glycoproteins of the Zaire Ebola virus strain.
Okay, so they are antigen tests, essentially looking for a very specific shape on the outside of the virus.
Yes, precisely. So when a patient arrived at a clinic in Mongwalu with a fever and hemorrhaging, the clinicians ran the rapid test.
Thinking it was Ebola.
Exactly. But the test looked for the Zaire protein shape, didn't find it, and returned a negative result.
Wow.
The tests were functioning flawlessly according to their design, but their design was catastrophically narrow.
It's like local police scanning a crime scene for a specific suspect's fingerprints, completely ignoring the muddy boot prints kicking down the front door.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, to put it in a tech perspective, it's like trying to scan a modern QR code with an old grocery store barcode reader. Like, the data's right there, the destruction is happening right in front of you, but the machine just beeps and says, not found.
It's a systemic blind spot.
I have to ask, how is this acceptable? If we know there are multiple strains of Ebola Bundibugyo, Sudan, Zaire, Why are we blanketing high-risk zones with single-strain tests? It seems like a massive failure of global preparation.
I agree, but it is a failure rooted in economics and recency bias. You see, the Zaire strain has caused the largest, most devastating epidemics in recent history.
Like the 2014 outbreak.
Right. So the pharmaceutical and diagnostic industries, funded by global health coalitions, poured billions into Zaire-specific countermeasures.
That makes sense financially, I get
It
it.
does. Developing, manufacturing, and distributing a multiplex rapid test that can instantly differentiate between all known strains is exponentially more expensive and technologically complex.
So they took the cheaper, faster route.
So the system prioritized the most statistically likely threat, leaving the door wide open for an alternate strain like Bundibugyo.
And it wasn't until May 14th that the truth finally came out.
Yeah, that was the turning point.
The Institut National de Recherche Biomédicale, the INRB down in Kinshasa, finally received patient samples and ran full genomic sequencing.
And genomic sequencing is entirely different. It doesn't look for a specific surface shape. It reads the actual RNA letters of the virus, the genetic blueprint itself.
But genomic sequencing requires massive laboratory infrastructure, stable power grids, and highly trained technicians.
You can't run that in the jungle.
Right. You can't run a next-generation sequencer in a field tent in Ituri. So they had to transport the physical samples all the way to Kinshasa, run the sequence, and realize they were dealing with Bundibugyo.
Which takes a lot of time.
Exactly. By the time that data printed out, the virus had a massive 6-week head start. And because we focused so heavily on Zaire over the last decade, we are essentially defenseless here.
We are defenseless in terms of pharmaceutical interventions, yes. The Ervebo vaccine, which, was a monumental triumph of modern medicine and highly effective against Zaire.
It's a great vaccine for Zaire.
It is, but it offers zero cross-protection against Bundibugyo. None. And the monoclonal antibody treatments that revolutionized Ebola survival rates are similarly useless. The binding sites they target simply do not exist on the Bundibugyo virus.
So a doctor in the DRC today, facing a patient crashing from Bundibugyo, what can they actually do for them?
Not much pharmaceutically. They are forced to rely entirely on intensive supportive care.
Just keeping them hydrated.
Hydration is key. They have to constantly manage intravenous fluids, correct severe electrolyte imbalances, maintain oxygen status, and aggressively treat any secondary bacterial infections that pop up.
So they're just buying time.
Exactly. They are trying to keep the body's systems functioning just long enough for the patient's own immune system to hopefully mount a successful defense and clear the virus.
It's just an agonizing position for those frontline workers. Because the virus is the vehicle, but as we see in the reporting, the environment provides the highways.
Yeah, the geographical spread is terrifying.
The WHO reports the virus rapidly expanded beyond Mongwalu into 16 separate health zones across 3 different provinces: Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu.
A huge area.
And then, the ultimate epidemiological nightmare scenario happened. Imported cases reached Kampala, the capital of Uganda.
Kampala alters the mathematical trajectory of the outbreak completely.
How so?
Well, we are talking about a dense, highly connected urban center with a population of millions. When a hemorrhagic fever transitions from rural, localized transmission into an urban transport hub, the rate at which the virus encounters susceptible hosts, what we call the contact rate, it skyrockets.
Because everyone is just packed together on buses and in markets.
Precisely. And tracing those contacts becomes nearly impossible in an urban sprawl.
But let's go back to the source of the fire in the DRC, because it's not just rural, it's a war zone. Ituri and North Kivu are highly insecure conflict zones.
Yeah, the instability there is a massive factor.
The WHO assessment details that over 100,000 people were newly displaced by violence in just the first quarter of 2026 alone.
Just in a few months.
And that adds to a pre-existing population of 5 million displaced people in the region.
5 million.
So how does displacement mechanics actually fuel viral spread? Like, biologically and logistically?
Displacement forces people out of stable environments into extremely dense, makeshift conditions. Internally displaced persons' camps often lack fundamental water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure.
So no clean water to even wash hands.
Exactly. Furthermore, Populations fleeing armed conflict are actively avoiding state authorities and established roads. They use informal hidden routes through the
They
forest.
don't want to be found.
Right. So if a displaced person is exposed to Ebola, they carry the virus silently through these underground networks.
They're out of reach of the healthcare system by necessity.
Exactly. And the WHO points out another profound sociocultural factor accelerating the spread here: the traditional burial practices in these communities.
Let's talk about the burials, because this is where virology violently clashes with deep human grief.
It's a very sensitive but critical issue.
The sources say the community is fiercely resisting the safe and dignified burial teams sent by the health organizations.
Yeah. In many Central African cultures, washing, touching, and preparing the body of a deceased loved one is a sacred, non-negotiable obligation.
It's how they say goodbye.
Yes. It ensures the individual's spirit transitions peacefully. To skip these rites is considered a profound disrespect and risks spiritual consequences for the entire family.
But from a biological standpoint, the moment of death in an Ebola patient is when the body is most dangerous. Right?
It is the absolute peak of danger. The viral replication has peaked. Every fluid in the deceased individual's body is saturated with infectious particles.
So just touching them is lethal.
Yes. So when a family lovingly washes the body barehanded, they are subjecting themselves to a massive viral inoculation.
And the public health response, understandably, is to send in a team wearing full head-to-toe hazmat suits, spray the home with chlorine, place the body in a sealed, opaque body bag, and bury it in an unmarked grave without the family touching it.
Which is standard protocol for containment.
And I completely understand the epidemiological necessity of that. I really do.
Yeah.
But I also understand why a grieving mother, already traumatized by armed conflict and displacement, would view a group of faceless people in spacesuits forcibly taking her child's body as a hostile, terrifying act.
Of course. It creates a massive breakdown in trust between the community and the health workers.
Which makes everything worse.
It does. Communities begin hiding their sick and conducting secret burials at night to avoid the burial teams, which only ensures the virus continues to spread undetected through the family networks.
Which brings me to the reality of contact tracing here. The bedrock of stopping Ebola is tracking down every single person an infected individual interacted with.
That's the golden rule of outbreak containment.
But I don't see how that is functionally possible here. I mean, how do you trace the contacts of a nomadic gold miner who is actively fleeing a non-state armed militia, hiding from government burial teams, and moving across porous borders?
It's an incredibly daunting task.
I'd argue standard epidemiological playbooks are completely useless in this environment. Why even pretend we can trace this? Shouldn't the response shift entirely to regional lockdowns or mass blanket quarantines?
You're hitting on a major debate in public health policy right now, but enforcing a blanket quarantine on a displaced population fleeing violence is a logistical and humanitarian disaster.
Because they're already running for their lives.
Exactly. If you try to lock down a region controlled by armed militias, you aren't providing medical care.
Yeah.
You are creating an open-air prison where the virus will burn through the trapped population unimpeded.
Oh, man.
You also cut off the food supply, trading an epidemiological crisis for a starvation crisis.
Oh, wow. So the local chaos is fundamentally uncontrollable, which inevitably triggers international panic.
It always scales up.
Right. This shifts our focus from the muddy roads of the DRC to the polished, highly tense floors of international diplomacy. On May 16, 2026, the World Health Organization officially declared the epidemic a public health emergency of international concern, or a PHEIC.
And a PAII Kukul declaration is the highest level of alarm the WHO can sound.
What does that actually do, practically?
It is a legal trigger under the international health regulations that mandates member states to coordinate a global response, share data, and mobilize funding.
But we have to address a massive hurdle explicitly highlighted in our research here, and we are going to examine this strictly neutrally, based entirely on the sources provided.
Right, sticking to the facts.
The World Health Organization faces profound distrust from a large segment of the American public. This isn't a fringe view. It is a mainstream political reality right now.
It's very prevalent.
The distrust is rooted in concerns over the organization's inherently political structure, historical controversies regarding its transparency, and the perception that it is susceptible to undue influence by certain member states.
Especially following the COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly, particularly stemming from the fallout of COVID-19.
And that trust deficit is a critical variable in any global health response. The WHO relies entirely on the voluntary cooperation of its member states.
They can't force anyone to do anything.
No, it does not have a global police force. When the foremost global health authority declares an emergency, but a significant portion of the population in the world's most resourced nation views that authority as corrupt or politically motivated, domestic public health messaging fractures immediately.
It creates a massive vacuum of trusted authority, and nature abhors a vacuum, so the media ecosystem immediately fills it with panic.
As it always does.
Right. Our sources track a specific media incident. Former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield appeared on a News Nation broadcast, and during this live national television interview, he warned of a, quote, very significant pandemic.
And in epidemiology, pandemic has a very specific defined meaning.
It's not a word you just throw around.
It is not. It denotes an epidemic that has spread across multiple countries or continents, usually affecting a large number of people globally.
And the use of that specific word caused such immense public and market anxiety that Snopes had to rapidly issue a fact check.
They had to walk it back.
Yeah. They stepped in to clarify that, based on the full context of his statements, Redfield likely meant a regional outbreak that threatened neighboring nations like Tanzania, Rwanda, and South Sudan.
Rather than a global pandemic akin to 2020.
Exactly. But the damage of the soundbite was done. People hear Ebola pandemic, and they immediately panic.
It demonstrates the fragility of the information ecosystem. Semantic precision is essential during an emerging crisis because words dictate policy, market reactions, and human behavior.
But the geopolitical friction goes far beyond television interviews, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It fundamentally alters how we treat the infected.
The logistics of treating these patients are incredibly complex.
This is where the diplomatic sources get incredibly tense. We have documented cases of geopolitical friction over medical evacuations. An infected U.S. missionary operating the region was successfully evacuated to Germany for high-level biocontainment treatment.
Right.
And separately, a U.S. physician who contracted the virus was flown to a specialized secure unit in Prague.
Now, these aren't standard medical flights. You can't just put them on a commercial jet.
No, I'd imagine not.
These require specialized aeromedical biological containment systems. They are essentially flying negative pressure isolation pods.
Like a sci-fi movie?
Very much so. They are incredibly expensive, highly coordinated logistical feats that require the host nation to accept the sovereign risk of importing a deadly pathogen.
Germany and the Czech Republic accepted that risk. But then the U.S. State Department attempted to open a dedicated quarantine and treatment unit right in Kenya.
That was a controversial move.
Extremely. The stated goal was to have a regional facility to treat American citizens who might be exposed, rather than flying them all the way back to North America or Europe.
Which makes logistical sense.
Right. But a Kenyan judge issued a stunning legal injunction completely blocking the U.S. from opening the facility.
It was a fascinating assertion of national sovereignty over global medical logistics.
The quotes from the Kenyan medical community are just explosive. The Kenyan Doctors Union publicly condemned the proposed U.S. unit as a disgusting backroom deal.
Strong words.
And they explicitly stated, and I am quoting the documents directly here, if it's too dangerous for America, it's too dangerous for Kenya.
And that statement cuts to the core of a historical grievance regarding medical colonialism.
How so?
Well, African nations frequently experience this dynamic where Western nations extract resources or establish geopolitical footholds. But the moment a biological threat emerges, those Western nations build fortified, exclusive medical silos for their own expatriates.
While leaving the locals to fend for themselves.
Yes, while relying on the underfunded local infrastructure to manage the broader fire.
I understand the historical grievance, I truly do. But from a purely pragmatic biological standpoint, I have to argue against the Kenyan Doctors Union here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't Kenya cutting off its nose to spite its face? The United States government have the resources to build a state-of-the-art, negative pressure, hermetically sealed medical fortress?
They definitely have the funds.
So if an American doctor gets sick in Nairobi, wouldn't a Kenyan public rather that doctor be isolated inside an impenetrable U.S.-funded fortress rather than taking up a bed and potentially shedding the virus inside a local Kenyan ICU?
It's a fair point.
It just feels like the judge made a decision based on political optics rather than biological safety.
You're presenting a rational logistical argument, but it ignores the reality of sovereign risk. From Kenya's perspective, they are looking at the 30 to 50% fatality rate of the Bundibugyo strain.
Right, it's highly lethal.
Even a state-of-the-art facility requires local logistics. They need waste disposal, local supply chains, airspace coordination.
So there are weak points.
A failure at any point in that chain introduces the virus into the Kenyan population. The judge decided that the risk of the U.S. importing an active Ebola case into their borders, regardless of the facility's sophistication, simply outweighed any diplomatic benefit.
It is the ultimate manifestation of medical NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. Every nation wants its citizens to have the best care, but no nation wants to host the biohazard. So, with politicians fighting, borders closing, and the WHO facing a massive trust deficit, public health officials are basically flying blind geopolitically.
They have to look elsewhere for guidance.
Right. When human diplomacy fails, we have to turn to raw mathematics to predict the future.
We turn to the data to attempt to draw a boundary around the chaos.
But the next source we are unpacking asks a terrifying question. What if the math itself is fundamentally flawed?
This is where it gets really interesting.
We are diving into an incredibly dense academic paper by Lanage and colleagues. It is titled, A Tutorial on Structural Identifiability of Epidemic Models, using structuralidentifiability.jl.
Now, while the title is dense, the concepts within this paper form the absolute bedrock of modern epidemiological forecasting.
Okay, break it down for us.
To understand the author's argument, we first have to establish the baseline of how we model disease outbreaks using differential equations.
The paper specifically focuses on SEER models. Let's break that down for the listener. ECR is an acronym for susceptible, exposed, infectious, and recovered. It is a compartmental model.
Think of the model as 4 giant buckets, representing the entire population of a city like Kampala. Initially, almost everyone is in the susceptible bucket. They can catch the disease.
They are vulnerable.
Right. Once a person is infected, they move into the exposed bucket. The virus is incubating within them, but they aren't shedding it yet.
So they don't look sick.
Exactly. Then they transition into the infectious bucket, actively spreading the pathogen to others. Finally, they move to the recovered bucket.
And recovered is kind of a misnomer, isn't it?
Very much so. In epidemiological modeling, recovered simply means removed from the transmission chain. Tragically, with Ebola, this bucket heavily includes those who have died.
The model tracks the flow of humanity from bucket to bucket, and the speed at which people pour from the susceptible bucket into the infectious bucket, and eventually into the recovered bucket, is controlled by what mathematicians call parameters.
Parameters are the underlying rules of the specific disease. The transmission rate, often denoted as beta, dictates how easily the virus jumps between people.
Okay, beta is transmission.
Right. And the recovery rate, often denoted as gamma, dictates how long a person remains infectious before clearing the virus or dying.
So public health officials use these parameters to see into the future. They input the assumed transmission rate and the assumed recovery rate into the differential equations, run the math, and generate a curve.
And that curve is used for planning.
That curve tells the mayor of Kampala exactly how many hospital beds they will need 3 weeks from now. But the Lanage paper introduces a concept that completely destabilizes this whole process: structural identifiability.
Structural identifiability is a mathematical property of the model itself. The authors define it as the theoretical ability to uniquely recover the true values of those hidden parameters, the beta and the gamma, if you were given perfect, ideal, noise-free data about the number of sick people over time.
Let me simplify this with an analogy for you listening. Imagine I tell you that the area of a rectangle is 12.
Okay.
That area is your observable data. It is the curve of sick people you see showing up at the hospital. Now, I ask you to identify the parameters of that rectangle, the length and the width. You can't do it.
Because there are multiple answers.
Exactly. Is the rectangle 3 by 4? Is it 2 by 6? Is 1 by 12? Those are completely different underlying parameters, but they all produce the exact same observable output of 12.
That is precisely what an unidentifiable epidemic model does.
Yeah.
The paper points out that you can have 2 entirely different sets of assumptions. One set says the virus is insanely contagious, but people recover in 3 days.
Like a fast-burning fire.
Right. Another set says the virus is only moderately contagious, but people stay infectious for 3 weeks. If you plug both sets of parameters into a complex, unidentifiable differential equation, they can output the exact same curve of projected infections.
Which means the model is lying to you. If a model is structurally unidentifiable, the public health official is looking at a curve on a screen, assuming it is scientific fact, without realizing it is just one of an infinite number of possible parameter combinations.
It's an illusion of knowledge.
If you don't know the true parameters, you don't know whether to spend your limited budget on building more isolation wards or hiring more contact tracers. You are basing life or death civic policy on mathematical quicksand.
And acting on an illusion of mathematical certainty during an Ebola outbreak results in mass casualties. That is the terrifying reality the researchers are attempting to solve.
So how do they solve it?
They argue that before you even look at the data, you must prove the mathematical structure of the equations can actually yield a unique answer.
And their solution involves a software package built in the Julia programming language. This package uses a technique called differential algebra.
Which sounds intimidating.
Extremely. Differential algebra sounds like a phrase designed specifically to induce a panic attack in a high school math student. How does this actually work to fix the models?
It is advanced calculus, but the core concept is elimination. Epidemic models contain state variables we can observe, like hospital admissions, and unobserved variables like exactly how many people are walking around in the exposed incubation phase.
We just can see the incubating people.
Exactly. Differential algebra provides a systematic, algorithmic way to manipulate the complex web of differential equations to completely eliminate all the unobserved variables.
It essentially distills the math down to its purest observable essence.
Yes. Once you eliminate the unknowns mathematically, the software analyzes the remaining algebraic structure. It can then spit out a definitive mathematical proof.
A yes or no answer.
Right. It says either yes, given the structure, you can definitively identify the transmission rate, or no, this structure is unidentifiable and any parameter you guess is mathematically meaningless.
What I love about this paper is that the researchers don't just stop at the high-level algebra. They advocate for a very practical visual communication strategy.
Because policymakers aren't mathematicians.
Right. They suggest that mathematical modelers need to embed these complex algebraic proofs directly into the visual compartmental diagrams, those bucket charts we discussed earlier.
They recognize the disconnect between theoretical mathematics and public policy. A health minister deciding whether to close a national border does not have time to audit Julia code.
They need it at a glance.
By visually color-coding the model diagrams, perhaps marking identifiable parameters in green and unidentifiable ones in red, the mathematicians provide instant visual transparency.
It forces the policymakers to confront the uncertainty. When they see that the transmission rate driving their lockdown policy is colored red, meaning it is mathematically unidentifiable, they know they are operating on a guess, not a fact.
It brings crucial transparency to the panic.
It demands intellectual honesty in public health forecasting.
And we desperately need that right now.
We really do. And speaking of public health forecasting and border closures, we need to take all of this, the biology of the Bunabugyo strain, the geopolitical friction in Kenya, the differential algebra running on supercomputers, and apply it directly to your reality, the listener.
Because it's coming to your doorstep.
Exactly. Because the outbreak is not confined to a vacuum. We are dealing with this massive crisis against the very uneasy backdrop of global travel in the summer of 2026.
Infectious pathogens do not respect national sovereignty, and they are completely indifferent to summer vacation itineraries.
They don't care if you booked a flight to Europe.
Not at all. The global connectivity that defines modern society is the exact mechanism that transforms a localized outbreak into a global threat.
We turn to our Newsweek source for this context. They paint a stark picture. Millions of Americans are currently finalizing their summer travel plans amidst a convergence of severe, overlapping biological threats.
The timing is just terrible.
The most immediate and direct impact of the DRC outbreak is the implementation of an aggressive U.S. travel ban.
And the logistics of a targeted travel ban are incredibly complex. The U.S. government is barring entry to any foreign nationals who have been physically present in the DRC, Uganda, or South Sudan within the last 30 days.
Just a hard no on entry.
Yes.
And for American citizens returning from those regions, they are legally permitted to re-enter, but they face a mandatory 21-day symptom monitoring protocol coordinated by local health departments.
This places a massive burden on port of entry infrastructure. Customs and Border Protection agents must be trained in preliminary health screening.
Which they aren't naturally trained for.
No, they aren't medical professionals. Specialized isolation areas must be maintained at major international airports like JFK or LAX. And the local health departments have to manage the daily check-ins for thousands of returning travelers, monitoring for fevers and hemorrhagic signs.
Every single day for 21 days.
Right, knowing that a single missed case could spark domestic transmission.
But Newsweek highlights a crucial point here. The threat isn't just exotic viruses flying in from overseas. We are facing severe domestic biological threats flaring up simultaneously.
It's happening right here at home.
The article details a sudden, localized Mpox surge right in the heart of Boston, with 77 recent cases identified.
And the Mpox surge provides a fascinating epidemiological parallel. It demonstrates how a virus can exploit dense urban networks, particularly around summer festival circuits, and crowded events to violently flare up.
Even if the national numbers look good.
Exactly, even when the broader national trend lines indicate the disease is in steep decline.
It proves that national averages are a comfortable lie. A national decline doesn't protect you if a local network is actively amplifying the virus.
And there's more than just viral threats.
Yeah, beyond human-to-human transmission, the article notes an environmental threat. The rising number of cases of flesh-eating Vibrio bacteria in Florida.
This introduces climate change as a massive accelerating variable in public health.
How does it connect?
Vibrio bacteria naturally inhabit coastal waters, but they thrive in warmth. As ocean temperatures steadily climb due to global climate shifts, the geographic range and the seasonal window for these terrifying bacterial infections expand dramatically.
So the water itself is getting more dangerous.
A beach that was perfectly safe a decade ago is now a potential biological hazard zone.
So synthesizing all this, what does it actually mean for you, the listener? It feels like the burden of public health has been entirely downloaded onto the individual.
You really have to be proactive.
The modern traveler is forced to become an amateur risk assessor, constantly calculating probabilities. We live in an era where the failure of a rapid test in a rural Congolese mine directly impacts the length of the security line at an airport in New York.
It's all incredibly interconnected.
And local climate shifts make a simple family trip to the Florida coast a newly calculated risk.
We are experiencing a fundamental paradigm shift. We can no longer mentally compartmentalize health threats as isolated events happening over there.
Because over there is right here in 12 hours.
Exactly. The networks of international trade, global aviation, and a changing climate are deeply, inextricably intertwined. An outbreak anywhere on the globe is, eventually, a logistical, economic, or biological problem everywhere.
It really makes me question the psychological toll of this era. I want to push back on the premise that more data is inherently good.
Okay, that's an interesting angle.
How do you balance living your life, going to work, taking a summer vacation, with the constant low-level hum of global biological threats? We have real-time tracking dashboards for Ebola, push notifications for Mpox surges, and satellite data for Vibrio blooms.
It's an overload of information.
Does this absolute abundance of surveillance data actually make us safer? Or does it just induce chronic anxiety and paralyze our ability to function? It feels like surveillance capitalism applied to biology.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of the information age. We possess the mathematical and technological capacity to model the destruction in real time, but the human brain lacks the psychological architecture to process a constant, global state of biological alarm.
We just aren't wired for it.
No, we really aren't.
Let's pull all these threads together. This has been a massive, deeply complex journey through our sources. We started at ground zero, examining the tragic emergence of the Bundibugyo strain in a DRC hospital.
It feels like a lifetime ago.
It does. We unpacked the catastrophic biological mechanics of hemorrhagic fevers and the critical failure of highly specific rapid tests that essentially gave the virus a 6-week head start.
We analyzed the socio-environmental accelerants, too. The vast populations displaced by armed conflict, the hypermobility of artisanal gold miners, and the tragic collision between essential epidemiological protocols and deeply held cultural burial practices.
We tracked the geopolitical shockwaves. We discussed the WHO's emergency declaration against the backdrop of profound American distrust and the intense medical anomieism that led a Kenyan court to block a sovereign U.S. biocontainment facility.
We dove deep into the theoretical math, exploring why seer compartmental models often suffer from structural unidentifiability, and how differential algebra is required to prove whether the parameters driving our public health policies are mathematical truths or just dangerous illusions.
And finally, we grounded it all in the realities of summer 2026, where overseas border bans, domestic Mpox flare-ups, and climate-driven bacteria force everyone to navigate the world as a constant biological risk assessment.
It is a staggering amount of interconnectivity to process.
It really is.
It demonstrates that modern survival requires understanding not just biology, but the fragile systems that surround it.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to carry with you long after this deep dive ends. It's inspired by the mathematical concept of structural identifiability.
I love this concept.
I want you to think about the unobserved variables in your own daily life and the media you consume. Just like a complex mathematical model completely fails, if it cannot structurally identify the true parameters of a disease, how often do we collectively panic over alarming news headlines based purely on surface-level outputs?
We see the result, but not the cause.
Exactly. We see the curve on the graph, we feel the anxiety, but we never pause to demand the differential algebra. We never identify the true underlying parameters, the corporate incentives, the political mechanics, the unobserved variables that are actually driving the global narrative.
We react to the output without ever verifying the structure of the equation.
Precisely. We react to the area of 12 without ever questioning if the reality is a 3 by 4 or a 2 by 6. It's something to deeply consider the next time a breaking news alert demands your fear. If you found this episode valuable, please like, subscribe, share, follow, and turn on notifications. It helps us continue bringing you content like this and ensures you never miss future releases.